Two employees start with almost identical skill. A couple of years later, one of them is running a division and the other is still waiting for someone to notice them. The gap between them was never about talent. It was about who got picked first. There's a name for this, and it comes from an unlikely place, a sociologist studying how scientific credit gets handed out, not a management consultant studying .org charts. Robert Merton called it the Matthew effect, after a line in the Gospel of Matthew about the rich getting richer and the poor losing even what little they have. Merton wasn't writing about money, he was writing about recognition, opportunity, and how a tiny early advantage doesn't stay tiny, it compounds, quietly and relentlessly, until it looks like an enormous gap in ability that was never actually there at the start. Here's the mechanism, and it's worth walking through slowly because it doesn't look dramatic at any single step. It only looks dramatic once you zoom out. One employee gets picked for a visible project first. That's it. That's the entire starting event. Nothing about their skill separated them from their equally capable peer at that moment. It was closer to a coin flip, a scheduling accident, being in the right meeting when someone needed a name fast. Small luck, nothing more. But that one break changes everything downstream, because visibility is not a neutral resource. It's the input that every other form of career progress runs on. The employee who got the visible project is now, by definition, visible. Leadership sees their name attached to something that mattered. Getting noticed by leadership isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of the next chapter. Because being noticed is exactly what generates the next opportunity. And the next opportunity, being bigger and more visible than the last, builds more visible skill, not necessarily more actual skill, but more skill that people can see and point to and cite when they're deciding who gets picked next time. This same pattern shows up well outside the office, which is part of why Merton's idea has stuck around in fields far beyond sociology. Education researchers have documented something almost identical with young readers. A kid who happens to start reading fluently a little earlier than classmates ends up reading more, which makes them a stronger reader, which makes reading more enjoyable, which makes them read still more. While a classmate who started out only slightly behind gets less practice, finds it less rewarding, and drifts further back, not because of a difference in raw ability at the start, but because early fluency and early struggle both compound in opposite directions. Nobody looking at those two kids in third grade would guess the gap started as almost nothing. That's the Matthew effect in miniature, and it's the same loop running in a classroom that runs in an office. A small early edge becomes the fuel for the next edge, and the next, until the starting point is unrecognizable. Meanwhile, back at the starting line, the equally talented peer who simply wasn't picked first is still standing there. Nothing happened to them. That's the whole problem. Nothing happened. They didn't get worse. They didn't make a mistake. They just didn't get the rep, the visible swing, the chance to put a win on the board where someone with influence could see it. So, the next time an opportunity comes up, who does the decision maker think of? The name they already have evidence for. Not because that person is more talented, because that person is more legible. Their ability has been demonstrated in a way the system can actually register. The equally talented peer's ability hasn't been demonstrated at all yet, through no fault of their own, and an unproven quantity will lose to a proven one almost every time, even when the proof was mostly luck in the first place. The gap between the two employees grows, quarter after quarter, not because of ability, because of who got the first shot. Picture how this actually plays out inside a company. Because it's rarely one dramatic decision, it's 100 small ones stacked on top of each other. A director needs someone to represent the team in a meeting with a VP. They grab whoever's name is top of mind, which tends to be whoever they worked with most recently on something that went well. That person does fine in the meeting, nothing spectacular, just competent and present. But now, the VP has met them. Not long after, when a cross-functional initiative needs a point person and the VP is asked for suggestions, that name comes up again not because anyone did a rigorous comparison of who on the team is actually best suited, but because it's the name the VP already has some familiarity with. That initiative goes on their record. It gets discussed in a leadership sync. Somebody mentions it approvingly to their manager. None of this is corrupt or even particularly unfair in any single instance. It's just how attention and memory work in busy organizations. But run that same tiny mechanism over and over across a couple of years, and you get one employee with a visible track record of high-profile work and another equally capable employee who's been quietly excellent at things nobody happened to be watching. Here's the part that lands especially hard once you've seen it once. The peer who didn't get picked isn't just missing opportunities. They're missing the raw material other people use to judge them. Performance reviews increasingly lean on visible impact, on what did you drive, on stories that are easy to tell in a room. An employee who has been doing genuinely excellent, high-quality work in a less visible lane doesn't have those stories in the same supply, not because their work was worse, but because it never got routed through anything that generated a story. So, on top of losing the opportunity itself, they start to lose the narrative competition too, and narrative, uncomfortably, is a huge part of how promotion decisions actually get made, whatever the official rubric says. Zoom into a slightly different corner of the same company, and you'll find the pattern running again, with different names attached. Say two analysts join a finance team on the same day. Similar backgrounds, similar test scores in the hiring process, genuinely comparable on paper. One of them happens to sit near the team lead and gets pulled into an ad hoc modeling request that turns out to matter for a board presentation. The other sits 2 rows over, does equally solid work on the recurring reports nobody outside the department ever looks at, and simply never comes up in conversation at the leadership level. Down the line, one analyst has presented to the board on their informal reputation, and the other doesn't. Ask anyone on that team why one analyst seems to be tracked for bigger things, and you'll get an answer about drive, or polish, or being a self-starter language that makes the gap sound like it was earned through character, when the actual originating event was closer to a seating chart. Malcolm Gladwell told almost the exact same story using a completely different setting, and it's worth sitting with because it strips out all the office politics and leaves just the bare mechanism. Look at elite youth hockey leagues, and you'll find something strange in the roster. A wildly disproportionate number of the best players were born early in the calendar year. Not because January babies are naturally better at hockey. Because youth leagues group kids by age bracket, and a kid born in January is up to almost a full year older than a kid born in December in the same bracket, and at 8 years old, that gap in physical development is enormous. The January kid is bigger, faster, more coordinated, purely as a function of age, not talent. Coaches scouting for the elite travel teams see that size and coordination and read it as ability. That kid gets selected for the better team. The better team means better coaches, more ice time, tougher competition, more games, a superior developmental environment, sustained not for one season, but for years. By the time that early birth month kid is a teenager, they actually are better than most of their peers, not because they started with more talent, but because the system handed them a decade of compounding advantage on the back of an accident of timing. None of it was about talent at the start. It was about timing. Sit with how strange that outcome actually is. If you scouted that same player years later, as a teenager, with no knowledge of the birth month sorting that produced them, you would swear you were looking at a naturally gifted athlete, bigger, faster, more composed under pressure than the kids cut from the roster a decade earlier. And in one narrow sense, you'd be right. By then, the gap is completely real, completely measurable, and completely earned through a decade of harder practice against tougher competition. That's what makes the Matthew effect so hard to catch in the moment and so easy to see in hindsight. The advantage isn't fake by the time you're looking at the end result. It's fake only if you trace it back to where it actually started, which almost nobody bothers to do. Because by then, the story has calcified into, this person was always the best one. Now here's the part almost nobody expects when they first hear this, and it's the part that should genuinely unsettle you if you sit on a promotion committee or run a team. Merton, studying scientists decades ago, and Gladwell, studying 8-year-old hockey players, landed on exactly the same underlying pattern from 2 directions that have nothing to do with each other. That's not a coincidence you can wave away as one clever author borrowing an idea. It means this mechanism isn't specific to labs or locker rooms or offices. It's a structural feature of any system that allocates future opportunity based on past visible performance. Which is to say, It's a structural feature of essentially every company on Earth. And the genuinely uncomfortable twist is this. We like to believe our promotion systems are identifying talent. Mostly, they're not. Mostly, they're identifying who got an early opportunity and then quietly relabeling that person's resulting track record as proof of superior ability. Proof that conveniently erases the coin flip that started the whole chain. Small starting advantages get treated as proof of ability, when they're really just proof of an earlier opportunity. You're not running a meritocracy if the input to the meritocracy is itself distributed by luck. In companies, this shows up in 3 specific, recognizable places. And it's worth naming them plainly because they're exactly where a manager has actual leverage. It shows up in who gets stretch assignments, the harder, higher visibility projects that stretch someone past their current role and give them a shot at proving they can operate a level up. It shows up in who gets introduced to executives whose name gets mentioned in the room when leadership is scanning for who's ready for more, because being known by name to the people making promotion decisions is worth more than most people realize. And it shows up in who gets credited publicly for team wins, whose name goes in the recap email, whose name gets said out loud in the all hands, even when the actual work was a genuine team effort, with several people contributing roughly equally. Each of those 3 moments looks small on its own, which is exactly why they're so easy to overlook. Nobody sits down and decides to build one employee up while starving another. It happens one convenient default at a time, the same name getting picked because it's the easiest, lowest risk choice in 100 separate small moments spread across a year. And because each individual moment is defensible on its own, of course, you'd send the person with the most recent visible win to represent the team. Of course, you'd credit the person who happened to present the update. The aggregate pattern hides in plain sight. Nobody feels responsible for it because no single decision was unreasonable. The unfairness lives entirely in the sum, not in any one part. If you only ever hand your best opportunities to whoever already looks impressive, you are not finding your best people. You are manufacturing them, while quietly starving everyone else of the chance to become as good. That line is worth repeating because it inverts how most managers think about their job. Most managers believe they're running a talent identification process, spotting the strong performers and rewarding them accordingly. What's actually happening, much of the time, is a talent manufacturing process dressed up as identification. The visible project doesn't just reveal who's good, it actively makes someone better, more credentialed, more central to the network, while its absence does the opposite to an equally capable person standing 3 feet away. Confusing manufacturing for identification is the whole trap, and it's an easy trap to fall into precisely because the resulting employee genuinely is impressive by the time you're evaluating them. You're just not seeing how much of that came from the opportunity and how much came from the person underneath it. So, what does a manager actually do differently, knowing this? A fair talent pipeline can't run on autopilot, because autopilot defaults to whoever already has momentum that's not a flaw in any one manager's judgment. It's the natural resting state of a system that rewards visibility with more visibility. Deliberately rotate the visible opportunities. When a high-profile project comes up, don't reflexively reach for the name that's already top of mind. Actively ask who on the team is equally capable and simply hasn't had the rep yet. When you're introducing people to executives, don't let the same 2 or 3 names become the permanent face of the team by default. Spread that exposure on purpose, the same way you deliberately balance a budget, instead of letting it drift toward whatever's easiest. When a team win happens, credit it accurately, by name, across everyone who actually contributed, instead of letting the story collapse onto whoever happened to be presenting the recap. None of this requires lowering the bar. It requires noticing that the bar you're using to judge people is partly built out of opportunities you yourself control the distribution of. There's a practical habit underneath all of this that's worth naming directly. Keep an actual list. Not a mental impression of who's been getting a lot of chances lately, an actual written record of who got which stretch assignment, which executive introduction, which public credit, over recent months. Most managers are confident they'd notice if the same 2 or 3 names kept winning every visible opportunity. Almost none of them actually check, because the pattern feels invisible from the inside. Each individual assignment decision feels justified in the moment, made for a sensible reason, and it's only in aggregate, laid out on a page, that the skew becomes obvious. That list is the single cheapest tool available for catching a Matthew effect before it hardens into a permanent gap between two people who started out equally capable. Go back to where we started. Two employees with almost identical skill don't end up years apart because one of them quietly became better while the other stood still. They end up that far apart because one of them got a small, arbitrary head start, and the system spent years compounding it. And if you're the one deciding who gets the next visible project, that compounding starts and ends with you, whether you intend it to or not. Treat the first opportunity like the leverage point it actually is, and you'll build a team that's genuinely deep instead of one that just has a couple of names everyone happens to recognize. Follow for more theories managers actually use.